it's all about light.
Who is Thomas Kinkade? How has he captured our affections, our ideals, and our aspirations? Thomas Kinkade has been called America's most popular living artist. Looking at Thomas Kinkade's work is like stepping into a dreamscape. He has captured our dreams. In many ways, he paints a better world than we've expected or might hope to have. It's a world we can dream about, a world we can share. And from his treasured paintings, we'll learn something about ourselves.
When I look back on, Tom's life and in my conversations with him, I realized from the time that he was actually quite small, he began to have a vision, and he began to set his course to accomplish that vision. And really, today, much of what Tom is doing is a fulfillment of the original vision instilled there in his childhood. And now he's working out that vision to a larger world.
This was his life. This was his main interest from the very, very beginning. When he, of course, you knew when he was very young. I guess it was his second grade teacher that told me that he would be a great artist one day. And I couldn't believe it, but I was thrilled for him. And his sister and I and his brother encouraged him.
My first remembrance of Tom or him drawing and being an artist, you'd go to Tom and say, hey, Tom, let's go outside and play kickball. I want to go do things outside. He goes, no, I got to draw. I'm an artist. And I said, Tom, you're 5 years old, lighten up. You can go outside. I mean, he'd eventually go outside and play. But the bottom line is he did have this real insight into who he was and what he was, and you can trace that throughout his entire existence.
My brother Tom was always someone who was very focused and who knew what he wanted to be at a very early age.
He could have been a doctor, he could have been a lawyer, which were the things that kids then wanted to do because that's where money was made. But Tom was insistent that art was going to be his life. Even if he failed, even if he didn't make any money, he was going to be an artist.
When you talk about somebody who's, Horatio Alger of the art world or rags to riches, Tom, he really is self-made. When I knew him, he had no money at all.
The journey at times has been very rocky and uncertain, and one of the things I admire most about Tom is his ability to not let that dissuade him from the goal, the vision that he's had.
Tom had it all together right from the start. I think he knew where he was going. If it took working 7 days a week, he was going to get there, and I admired that in him. It's a real problem, especially with artists.
He seemed to have such a zest for life, such a wanting to live to the fullest. I think he made the best advantage of his life, whatever it offered him in the beginning. I never, ever thought that Tom came from any type of a background that in any way inhibited him in his love for beauty.
I'm amazed at how dedicated he is, how hard he works. I don't think I've ever seen that before in another artist or in anyone in any other line of work.
Tom is painting the art for the people, nobody else. He's not painting it for John Doe, rich man, or somebody's going to hide it someplace. He is painting it so everybody can see it.
Thomas Kinkade looks at the world as a keen observer with an affectionate eye. He sees the best and captures our yearnings. In many ways, his paintings take us to a place that we would like to be. I suspect that Thomas Kinkade paints the place that we would like to be forever. Thomas Kinkade was born in 1958 in Sutter General Hospital in Sacramento, California. Proud parents Mary Ann Pingle Kinkade and William Thomas Kinkade II lived in Latrobe, California. The family moved to Placerville in 1964, where Tom began his education at the Sierra Elementary School and Schnell Elementary School.
Looking back, our family was very unique. It was a single-parent home. My mother worked long hours. I would come home, my brother and I would come home, we'd do our homework. There wouldn't be a mom waiting there. And we were probably the only family that was like that, or one of the few that I knew. And that was a different era at that time, the early 60s, growing up, when parents, most of the time, as a hangover possibly from the 50s, families were typically still together.
We grew up in a time really where, at least it seemed to us, single-parent households didn't exist all that much. I mean, it's much more common now. And all of our friends had, you know, in-house dads that were kind of available to them at any given time. And I think that it affected Tom in a lot of ways. And he, more than anything, wants people to appreciate, you know, solidarity and the comfort of having people around that are yours no matter what, unconditionally, having your family available to you. And I see it in his art, and I see it in his words.
I think looking back on some of the pain from my childhood, because we were not only just a single-parent home, it was also a very impoverished environment. My mother would stretch foods with oatmeal. I remember this very distinctly. I had a hamburger that wasn't half oatmeal until I was probably in my teens. I went to a restaurant and discovered I never liked hamburgers. And people say, let's go get a burger. Ew, I hate burgers. Because my mom would mix it with oatmeal. I don't know where she got the idea to do that.
My mother had an ability to make us feel rich even though we were very poor. And again, my sister had to do with that too. I never felt that we were wanting. In retrospect, I recognize now that we were when my mother suddenly, you know, my mother had an old 8mm movie projector, and when it disappeared, she said, oh, I had to give it to a friend. What that really meant is she had to sell it to buy food. And when our couch disappeared, you know, pretty much the same thing. I recognize now what was going on, and when we ended up with these big tubs of peanut butter that said El Dorado County on the front of them, it wasn't that so much, oh, you know, my friend had a few of these extra tubs of peanut butter sitting around. Why don't you have one, Marianne? Is that, well, somehow or another we ended up getting those because of, you know, our economic straits at the time.
Tom didn't have any money except what he earned when he became a paper boy. And because we were just barely getting by. But again, we never starved, but there were things we'd like to have we didn't have.
And the question is not, do we experience pain? Because I think everyone does. But the question is how God can marvelously take those experiences and shape the diamond that he wants to make out of your life.
Tom, one time, this was when he was very young, drew a picture on the dining room wall. And in order to get around it, you know, when I came home from school, because I was in high school at the time, so Tom probably was in grammar school, it's like I tried to clean it, wasn't coming off. So what are we gonna do? So he just wrote, I love you, Mom, underneath it. What could she do? There wasn't anything she could do.
Ever since I was a little dinky kid, I was known as the artist. I was always the kid who could draw. You know, other kids had other talents. I had friends who knew how to stand on their head for a minute. You know, for all I know, they've made their living doing that, you know. But I could draw, and I got attention for it. The teachers would say, oh, you're the artist. And I'm left-handed, and I just always had this certain knack for drawing. And so God gave me two things. He gave me, number one, that knack, that talent, that gift, if we would call it that, and yet he gave me a desire. Since I was a little baby, putting lines on a piece of paper and seeing a three-dimensional world emerge just tickled me. Ever since I was a little kid. I mean, I would just giggle with laughter. My mother would hear me in the other room giggling. What's going on? Oh, Tom's drawing. And I'd be drawing, and it would be so neat. Oh, it looks like a face, or it looks like an animal, or whatever it was I was drawing. And that just excited me then, and it still excites me.
Tom was an artist from the start. I didn't understand it, you would see, but I knew what he was. And he knew what he was. That was important because, what was it, very early age when he went to camp, a friend of ours said, oh, I like this picture that you've drawn. And he didn't hesitate to charge her $25 for it. She said, what do you want for it, you know? But he knew, he said, well, someday that'll be worth something. And I thought, oh, this kid has guts, you know?
His monies that he would earn on his paper route, or, you know, doing whatever he would be doing to earn money at the time, would go towards art supplies, or he would constantly be picking up what other people cast aside, old poster board and that sort of thing, so he could bring it into his studio, as he called it. He called his bedroom his studio from a very early age. Matter of fact, he actually built a second story onto his bedroom, and it's hard to describe exactly how he did this, but there was this kind of strange-looking loft that was hanging from the walls in his room that he would sleep on. Why? So he could open up space for art supplies and hanging pictures and you know, all the things that would go into a studio proper.
He started right from scratch, stretching his own canvas, building his own frames. He'd get old pieces of wood and build frames. He said, well, if I'm going to do it, I want to know everything there is about it.
My very first remembrances of him, he was always doing these sorts of things. Matter of fact, his studio eventually spread into our entire house. The smell of oil paint was just permeating everything. He would, you know, my mother had pictures stored under his bed. The laundry room were filled with the old canvases that he had painted. You know, parts of the living room were filled with things that he was working on in relation to his art. It was just, you know, there was just no doubt, trust me, that Tom perceived himself as an artist from day one, and, you know, continued with that vision without wavering throughout his entire adolescence.
Every time he'd paint something, one was better than the other, and it would just shock me. I have some of the old ones, you know, and I think, oh, that's how wonderful. And everywhere you look, we had paintings, and the house smelled like it constantly.
I used to draw these incredible weirdos, just these horrendous-looking people, and, you know, we just laugh at them. You know, Tom creating this guy that looked completely distorted, and it was absolutely hysterical. As a kid, it's like, this is the neatest thing in the world, to be able to create these renderings of these things that everybody wants to either laugh at or enjoy. He also kind of became known as the artist around school, you know, junior high, high school, and, you know, even in grammar school, everybody takes on a sort of tag as to what they are. You might be the athlete or the intellect or, you know, the cheerleader or whatever. Well, Tom was the artist, and he, even at you know, during his high school days, would live that life.
He studied everything he could find about any artist, old or new, he read. And his sister, fortunately, worked at the library, and she'd bring all of these books home, and he pored over them, over their lives, but their paintings as well. He just, any artist, anything, and he just went so deep into their lives. He could tell you what made them what they were, and he wanted to be like them, and he, you know, tried to emulate everything they did and their lifestyle, and I thought it was very remarkable for a young man, especially, you know, what, 14, 15 years old.
He very quickly developed himself, and also developed connections, if that makes any sense, because we were real fortunate to have, while Tom was in high school, Glenn Wessels living, you know, just one house down from us, and with his studio, and he was able to go over and really absorb a lot of knowledge that way.
And Glenn was he was retired, and he was old, and he loved his work, but he wasn't as active as he might have been. And he took an interest in Tom, and Tom said, I'd like to see your studio. And so Glenn took him back to this big old barn where the studio was, and Tom loved it. He ate it up, and he would go over and clean the barn up, and just clean up for him, anything, just to hang around and watch what he was doing.
Here I am, a 12-year-old kid without a dad in the home. You know, no male role model to speak of. And God brought me a role model. He brought me this man who came to our town. He retired after his wife had died, and he was a college professor of art. He retired and built a studio 100 feet from my house. Little dinky small town up in the mountains of California. Here comes this internationally known artist and builds a studio, a stone's throw away from where I live. And I became his apprentice. More than an apprentice, I became his friend. He was 80 years old at the time. He's a wonderful, dear old man, and he brought me in and he taught me about life and about art.
I've never met anyone in my life that was as focused as him from the beginning. I mean, I think in the very first conversation I ever had with him, you know, he told me that he was a painter, and, you know, I know Boys State, he told me all about Glenn Wessels and about, you know, that's what he wanted to do. I remember going to museums with him very early on in our friendship. He did, you know, he was always drawing and sketching.
He earned any success he has by the grace of God. He has earned it because he has worked hard at it. It wasn't just, some kids say, yeah, well, he had the talent. He developed the talent. He found the inside of him and he developed it. And he worked at it, and he read, and he practiced, and he did everything he could to improve. He didn't stop for a minute. And talent is talent, but you still have to, I still maintain you have to work. You have to work at it.
The children being raised in divided homes, it's large today. And I believe that Tom gives a message of hope to these people. He gives a message that there is a future. We live in an age of apathy to some degree right now. And I think Tom lifts them from the age of apathy. And he says, there is value and there is hope, and your children can do something in the world that's significant. And they need to go on. And I believe his message is very relevant to our culture in relationship to our children.
Tom rejects the idea of art for art's sake. He firmly believes that art serves larger ends than that. It would be a mistake to imagine that because he doesn't paint portraits, he doesn't care about people. Quite the contrary. He chooses landscapes, cottages, cityscapes, precisely because they reveal so much about people. The best portrait of a family can be the home that it lives in, or the garden that it cultivates. And the best portrait of a nation can be the look and the life of its cities and villages. It's as simple as that.
I think that Thomas has kicked into a mainstream feeling. A lot of times art can be a little frightening to people. Tom's art is never ever frightening. You feel like you know the man, you feel like you know what he's saying in his artwork, and you want to be part of that.
A lot of the people who collect Tom's artwork or who bring Tom's worlds into their home are people who've never thought about art before. They've never even considered themselves as art buyers.
His artwork cuts through all the clutter of media, the internet, the television, all those things that clamor for your attention when you walk inside the house. Looking at a Thomas Kinkade painting, understanding who the artist is, where his heart, what his mission is, helps you cut through all that clutter. It gives you that silent and that peaceful respite for the day, that you know you can go back out into that busy world, that noisy world that wants your heart, time, money, and dollars, and make a difference.
I remember when I got exposed to Tom's art for the first time. I was standing there before one of his paintings, Home for the Holidays. And all of a sudden, it brought back memories of my own childhood. And my wife knows that I'm usually on the go all the time. And for me to stand in any one place for 15 minutes and just observe a painting, it had such an impact on me that that was the first piece of art that I acquired. And I can sit before that painting, have a cup of tea, and just enjoy a world that I actually grew up in. And that means a lot to me to be able to have that kind of world in my house.
Tom, that I know, is definitely a romantic. I wish that everyone had the ability to see around them with Tom's eyes, with his insight. Everything is just a little better with him. The skies are just a little bit more colorful. The detail that he remembers, that he sees, that he puts in, it draws you to a higher state. Tom always has put things in the best possible light he could.
The paintings are a landscape of language. They are a language all their own. I mean, for example, you look at a painting like Garden of Prayer or Springgate, and you know, Springgate, well, it's a roadway going up into the distance, but it's really not a road. It's a message about an invitation, about the gate that lies open before us, and about the path of life, so to speak, the journey of life as we go around corners and find the unexpected. Or a painting like Bridge of Faith is to me very symbolic of facing obstacles in our life, that stream that comes down, and you need to cross those obstacles, and your faith is what gets you through. Faith is a crumbling bridge. I don't portray it as a perfect structure. It's often crumbling and weak, but it gets us over that obstacle, our faith in God. I see the paintings as a language of kind of spiritual realities, but portrayed in everyday forms.
From an artist's standpoint, his softness was his strength. It wasn't a weak point whatsoever. The huge man that can walk down and pick up a small child and spend a minute with it, instead of trying to be macho or not taking the time to do things that you really need to do. And like I say, as a man in my age, I watched him, and I needed that. It was something I needed to express to people. So his strength
was his softness.
And I always admired him so much because every time he produced a piece of art of any kind, his heart was out there on his shirt sleeve, and it was up to the general public to either give him the acclaim or to accept it.
A lady came in a wheelchair and she rolled up and looked at one of Thomas's originals. And I knelt down next to her. And it was just so fabulous that the lady could come alive. She was looking at Thomas's work. And I learned then that Thomas wasn't selling himself. He was really selling something that people saw. Not everybody saw it. Some people saw it as something to put on the wall. But there was a group of people who see what Thomas really is about. And yeah, it was really something to see that.
There's one of the great secrets in living that I think my paintings may suggest to people, and that is that no matter how dark the storm is, no matter how deep the clouds, how much the winds blow and the rain seems to pummel your life, the storm clouds will clear and the darkness will pass and a new day will dawn. And I think when I paint a world of tranquility with light that breaks forth, it is a reminder to people of that life truth. Now, we all have difficulties in our life, and we all are less than perfect individuals. Lord knows I look at my own failings sometimes and stand in wonder that God could even choose to use me. And yet, as I think of God's divine hand in each of our lives, I am determined to remind people God chooses to bless us.
Tom's vision has been to involve the collector, to bring the collector into a place where the collector can find peace and happiness and really, you know, escape. We call it the 3-second vacation. You could be having a terrible day. Who knows what could be going on at home or at the office. But by looking into one of Tom's worlds, you can really walk into that place and be a part of it and have it be your own world.
Tom has had probably 1 million compliments in his career, but I have heard him say many times that the greatest compliment that you can pay him is that you would like to step into his picture.
He wanted the average man to be able to appreciate art the same as the rich man, not the rich man buying up, well, this is a Van Gogh, and this is a Picasso, and this is a blah, 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 you know. Tom decided his mission was to do a painting and multiply it so it could be spread out amongst the average person.
I think when people look at the paintings, they say to themselves, I feel comfortable in this world this artist has painted. And they want to step into that world. They want to step into that cottage. And in fact, it's been kind of interesting. The comment I get almost universally at every art show is, I wish I could live there. To which I reply, I wish I could too. That's why I painted it. It's the kind of place I would love to live, would love to visit. And I don't really paint the world the way it looks. I paint the world the way we all kind of daydream it would be. I get rid of all the ugly edges and the hard, cold reality and try to paint a world full of light and life.
He put you into his landscapes. I mean, you just forgot where you were and could be there in that hut or the trail or walking through that timber.
It amazes me that he can do that with so many of his canvases. And they're in different ways, but they do draw you into it, and you could be a part of that scene.
People want to be literally in the paintings. They feel the warmth and the peacefulness, you know, the serenity of it. I mean, that I think was what he's done. He's created an image in a world that people want to be in. And it revolves around the home and all of that.
You know, he paints these houses, in my opinion. When he is painting them, he sees a family inside of them. And it's all filled. You can tell the smoke is coming out of the chimney, the lights are on. And for Tom, this is a family. This is a family, a group that stays together. And I think that's all part of the simpler times that most of us yearn for.
I think the worlds I paint are idealized, and all of us in our heart probably have a need to daydream, to dream about a world a little more perfect. And anyone who thinks that I paint this kind of perfect world because that's the world I live every day, you have to realize we all live in the real world. We all face pain, we all face challenges, and yet hopefully, by God's grace, we can see beyond those.
His personal faith is a driving force for everything that he does. His belief system. He believes that he can have a major impact on America. He believes in this country. And so everything that he paints has to do with that belief. And so he's not looking at his painting as merely a means of a business venture, but he's looking at his paintings as creating worlds that people can enter into. And when the people enter into those worlds, they find hope, they find peace, they find joy. And that's how I discovered much of Tom's work, was entering into one of those worlds myself.
You know, in art school, I was told so many times, you know, your art is all about you. You know, it doesn't matter if someone likes it, doesn't matter if they understand it, if they appreciate it. You know, your art's about you. You got to do it for your own enjoyment, your own self-expression. And something about that didn't sit well with me. I began to realize my art's not about me. It's about you. It's about that other person. It's about letting something within you pour out in love to other people.
Like a sky full of stars. There's a lot of stars, and they all shine. But if you look up, you're going to find a few that shine brighter. Well, that was Tom Kinkade. He was one of those stars. And his drawings were superb. But everyone else drew well, because it's a very competitive college. And we draw people from all over the world there. And he could draw well, but he had one extreme quality. He knew what to draw. It was not just that he knew how to draw, he didn't have to be told. And it seemed that every time you asked Tom Kinkade for a drawing, he supplied two, at least two. So he was filled with good ideas.
It was a time for all of us of lots of work and very little money. And in seeing Tom go from being an art student into seeing him actually get started as a painter, I saw that there were two things that really put him over. One of them was the ability to work long and hard and just stick with it. And the other was a willingness to get out and promote himself. He and Jim turned out virtually all of the actual production backgrounds for the movie Fire and Ice. It was a barbarian adventure film. They'll tell you now that the stuff isn't so good, but really, especially considering how much work they did and their age, the stuff is pretty good. It was an amazing amount of work. It was over 1,000 paintings.
He was making a good income with the working in the movies, and I was working as a nurse, so we had those finances. And Tom felt that it was time for him to step out and do his own work. And there wasn't a immediate success there. And there were months that there weren't finances, and it never slowed Tom down.
He was sent to me by a friend named Doug Jones in La Jolla, who had a small art gallery. Called me and said, I think this is an artist that has great potential. We certainly can't hold him, so I'm sending him up to you to see what you think. And I said, well, fine, because we got a lot of calls like that, and maybe 1 out of 100 works out. But Tom and Nanette came in carrying a few paintings and photographs of his work, and we could see immediately that he had the potential to be what I thought one of the great big-time landscape painters, which is, as I told him at the time, I think he could be a cross between Sidney Lawrence and Thomas Moran. He had that potential, and that's speaking, those guys were tens.
So here's a guy, who sees an unknown artist and already is being able to say, hey, this is somebody that is going to go on to really big things. And you know what? In that business, you can't afford to say that about everybody.
I was really impressed by, particularly when Tom started working for galleries and working up stuff for his later one-man shows, that he really worked hard and worked long hours.
He was a competent artist with an open mind. So many of them are on such an ego trip that you can't discuss anything. But that wasn't the problem with him. When we first look at those paintings, they stopped you. And I handled a lot of paintings. They have the presence of a great painting, and I almost didn't believe what I was saying because he was so young. He was 24 years old.
He continued to just press forward with that vision, painting the paintings, sending the paintings out, and waiting and praying that something would happen. And you know, eventually things began to open up.
We sold the paintings that he had, that he brought to us, and the next batch he brought were maybe 3 or 4 other paintings, but they'd improved tremendously just in the few suggestions we'd made. He knew what we were talking about and had the talent to carry it through. I admired Tom's landscapes, the mountain scenes that he'd done for us, mainly California Sierra scenes. And I said, Tom, one of the great painters, landscape painters of North America was Sidney Lawrence, who painted the Alaska painter. I said, I think you ought to go to Alaska and get a feel of that wilderness. Sierra Nevadas are one thing, British Columbia is another, but when you're in the wilderness in Alaska, it's just a different feeling. Said, I've got a friend, I'll send you up to Jim Harrower and spend some time with him on his lodge out in the Stony River, and 150, 200 miles from Anchorage, but right in the Alaska range, wonderful peaks on either side of this roaring river. And he agreed to do that.
This was a phenomenal experience for him. And he came back with such a rich wealth of ideas for paintings through that experience. And I think this is something that Tom's done his whole life, of adventuring and painting. It started, as a kid, he'd hike and sketch, and of course the trip that he and Jim Gurney took, where they went across country and painted and sketched across the United States. But this type of fueling of his art through experience has been a big part of his art.
I think Tom, more than a lot of artists, realized very early on that to be successful as an artist, your work has to sell. It doesn't matter if you create the world's greatest painting and spend thousands of hours on it. If no one's going to buy it, you're never going to get to the next step. He always knew that.
So our first show was a sellout. From then on, I didn't have to call anybody. If there was a Kinkade show, there were people just swarming into the gallery, and in an hour's time, everything was sold. Of course, Tom would be there. He believes in himself, and he's vibrant, and he makes people feel good. They want his paintings.
Family, first and foremost, means the wife and children who play such a vital role in Kinkade's life, as in his art. Family also means the playful sense of humor Kinkade honed as a child and now displays in paintings that often hide multiple initials and birth dates of his loved ones, hearts, holiday dates, Christmas wreaths, and other joyous motifs. And above all, family means faith. In the same year that he married Nanette, Thomas Kinkade made a commitment to putting God at the center of his life, turning life and career over to his direction.
Well, I was raised in a Christian home, and my mother was a woman of prayer. My parents were divorced when I was about 5 years old, and I never had a role model in my home of a dad, of a father that was a loving father image. I didn't see a marriage in operation. My mother never remarried, and yet she did one thing that touched her kids' lives forever. She kept us in prayer, and she prayed for her kids every day, and her whole family is serving the Lord today. But during the course of growing up in a Christian home, I think I went through the usual phase of doubt and frustration that probably all kids do. And that is the greatest blessing a child can go through, is a period of doubt, because when they come back to the Lord, it is so strong and it's theirs. They have it in their heart from then on. And about age 20, I just decided that I need God. I just needed Him more than I needed my next breath of air. And when I reached that point in my life, I always say, when I got saved, my art got saved. And that was the point at which God's light began to infuse my paintings. I was always drawn to painting effects of light from a visual sense. But when I got saved, God became my art agent, if I could coin a term. He began to open doors for me that were doors I should go through, and he began to close doors that were doors I shouldn't go through. And he made the difference between the doors real obvious so that I could see my way every day. And he began to do something I didn't expect, which was to put his light in the paintings. And now when I think of my paintings and I think of the light in the paintings, I don't think of it only in visual terms or emotional terms, but I think of it spiritually as a way to get God's light into people's homes and into their lives. You know, Matthew 5:16 tells us to let our light shine before men, that they see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven. And if there is anything good in these paintings, my prayer is that they will glorify our Father in heaven.
He doesn't see himself as super spiritual. He's a Christian man that is still growing in faith like so many others. When I think of Tom, I can't help but think of Nanette, because Nanette is stability and strength of character. And together they make a tremendous couple. And I believe that much of Tom's success and much of what he is the result of a wonderful wife who's there with him, supporting him and loving him.
Our family had just moved back to Placerville. And actually it was moving day, and our moving van was out front. We were unloading all the furniture. And Tom rode down Fairview Drive, our street, on his bike. He was the newspaper boy for our neighborhood. And, you know, I saw Tom. And it was, and actually, you know, and he saw me. It was really just a connection there. And a couple days later, it's a funny story, but he came by to solicit the newspaper at our house. And the neighbor girl and I had just met, and we were going to be going swimming. So I had ran in, put on my bikini, and was getting ready to come out to meet her to go to the pool. And Tom came up to the door and knocked on the door. And so when I opened it, I assumed it was going to be her, so I gave it the ta-da this way. And, you know, I screamed and Tom laughed, and so that kind of like was the kickoff for our relationship.
Nanette completes Tom and centers him without a doubt. Her ability to stand by him through the tough times, and nothing happened easily with, I mean, people perceive, well, you know, Tom's a great artist and it just all happened overnight. No, there were times when, you know, Tom was painting and following this career, and Nanette was, you know, working night shift as a nurse in order to support that process, to keep it going, to basically provide the economic support needed to it. Nanette shared Tom's vision from the day one and continued to share that vision throughout the success, but more importantly, when it wasn't successful, when Tom absolutely knew he was going to be an artist, where everyone else might be saying, hey, can you get your husband to get a normal job? I mean, you know, he might be able to drive truck and get $20 an hour or something like that. You know, Nanette would have none of it. So she absolutely complimented him in his vision and centered him in terms of his life.
She is absolutely perfect. She's perfect for him. She supported him in the beginning when he was just struggling, and she worked. And she worked as a nurse while he stayed home and painted. And he was determined to make a go of it because he loved her. And she'd come home and help him stretch canvas, or anything she could do to help. Anything.
She helped him fully appreciate the importance of home in that regard, because Nanette became home for Tom, and sort of the vision of their life together became his ideal for what it would be to be a family and have children and remain bonded as a man and wife and what have you. So it probably really crystallized that vision of family for him more than anything, having Nanette there for him, even in his mind early on when they weren't married. He nonetheless presumed he would eventually be married to Nanette. That was going to be family. That was going to be home. That was going to be his life.
My life as an artist is so parallel to my life as a family man. In fact, it's been so fascinating and almost amusing to me that I've become, in a way, a bit of a spokesman for family, home, children. marriage, the joy of marriage. I mean, I married my childhood sweetheart, Nanette, and I tributize her in every painting. So I began talking about how fun it was to be married to my best friend. And I found people just resonating with this. You know, there's so many voices that are telling us the opposite. And we see, be it political leaders or sports figures whose marriages fall apart, whose marriages are meaningless. And yet I honor my wife and love my wife. Same with my children. I believe children are a blessing. I've said this phrase 100 times. Children are not a burden. They're a blessing. You know, they're not something that we have to escape from. And 2 weeks after they're born, we find a way to farm them out to other people. They're meant to be a blessing. They're the greatest adventure God gives us. What a marvelous thing to shape eternity through our children. Because children are the only thing you can create that are eternal. They are eternal beings. God creates them, and He gives you a chance to shape their lives and touch the future.
As newlyweds, the Kinkades agreed that the Hollywood fast track was not the direction they wanted their fledgling family to take. The couple returned to Placerville, seeking the bedrock American virtues centered on family and faith that they believed could best be nurtured in a small-town environment. At the same time, Kinkade moved his art back to the landscape and narrative subjects that were dearest to his heart.
They were young, very much in love, very cute couple. And probably my favorite memory of Nanette was I stopped by the studio one night to drop some paintings off or something, and she was out mowing the lawn with Merritt strapped her in her back in a backpack. Tom was down painting, and she's out there mowing the lawn like crazy. They did a lot together. You almost always saw them together. They were very good, homey people. Sometimes they would come by in the afternoon, and one day Nanette grabbed a broom and started sweeping out the warehouse while Tom and I were unpacking some boxes or something. So they were very, very down to earth, good people.
Well, Tom and I have always been a team throughout the whole process of the evolving vision and company. It's very exciting how the Lord's been faithful at each phase of the company. Originally, the faith was just for the business becoming established at all.
His original artwork, even before he went into the publishing business, was well received. And so they were like the rest of us. They were living in Placerville, you know, doing their own yard work, driving, you know, a 5-year-old car. But no, I think they were always very comfortable with what they had. It wasn't like they were desperately seeking some goal that this was going to attain for them. They were very content with what they were doing, even then, even in Placerville.
One of the things that I enjoy when I see Tom and Nanette and the children together is they're a real family. They're not a perfect family, but they're a real family. And they work together and they labor together. And there's that servant heart, there's that serving each other. And I think we can take a lesson from that we don't have to be perfect to have harmony in the home.
When we've been married just a few years, we had a desire to go to Europe, to be able to paint in England and in France, and to plein air paint throughout Europe. And we had an opportunity to do this using a mobile home from a friend by swapping a painting and without any real finances. And we left just having delivered probably 12 paintings to a gallery that we were showing at the time. And by faith, assuming that when we came back, they would have all sold and then we'd have the money that we needed to continue. And after 5 weeks, we returned and nothing had sold.
Through the whole thing, he's never wavered. I mean, most of us, I know myself, you know, in your dark moments, you think, oh God, you know, what am I doing? And you know, gee, maybe I'm going down the wrong path. Maybe, you know, maybe I should be thinking about something else. Maybe I'm, you know, you question yourself. You start, I mean, it's human nature. You doubt it, whatever. Tom, he just doesn't do that. He is completely wired into that idea of becoming one of America's greatest painters.
Tom believes in himself more than anyone I've ever known. He truly knew and believed. And I think that that is sort of a source of inspiration for me and a lot of other people, that yes, it is doable. And I do think that Tom has probably changed a lot of people's lives for the better, just because he gave them the ability to say, there are good things out there.
At that time, our savings, our life savings, which I think it was about $5,000 that it took to produce a print, and rolled the dice, decided to go ahead and make a print of one of Tom's Alaskan scenes, which was Dawson of the Yukon.
I got a call from a printer that he was having a problem with a painting. It needed to be reshot, and I believe it was Dawson. It was like a slice of life. There was people in the street, and there was, you know, it was kind of a bird's eye view of a town, which is something that I wasn't seeing in other people's paintings, because they were sort of static, and there was life to his painting.
Neither of us had any real business background. My background in nursing and Tom and his art, he was the visionary and I was the implementer.
Sometimes we would ship enough posters, you'd look down, the hallway would be nothing but maybe 25 or 30 cylinders that we had rolled and packaged and processed the orders, and then Nanette would throw them in the back of the car and haul them down to the post office and ship them out. It was a very small operation in the beginning.
Tom was producing his own prints, having them done, sitting out at a card table in front of one of our local supermarkets here in town, selling those prints on his own for $25 a piece.
It took us, at least 6 months to sell 200 prints. And I bought 30 of them to keep it going. And, but then after the first 200, somehow people, that's 200 people who had seen the print and liked it, and they passed the word around. And then the rest, when he printed 1,000, those went pretty fast at $35. We raised the price a whole $10 because they were selling so nice. Then we sold out, and people were desperate to get more. And he wasn't going to print anymore. And so it just went from there. That was such a success in the end that he just kept going.
And he actually donated the original to the library, which hangs in the library to this day. It's a very, very large piece, something like 3 foot by 4 foot, and it would probably, if I had to put a value on it, I would say it'd be worth $500,000 today. It wasn't worth perhaps that much at the time, but so he's been very, very generous to the, not just the town of Placerville, but the county of El Dorado and surrounding areas.
The annual Placerville project has been going on now almost 10 years, and every year it benefits a different charity. Every year the money stays right in Placerville, and Tom does it out of the goodness of his heart. He is still giving back to the town that he grew up in, that he thinks of as his hometown. I know he still thinks of Placerville as home, and he hasn't lived there, and he probably will never move back to Placerville, but that's where he grew up. And his English teacher is still there at the high school, and you can go into the county library and see one of his early works. That's where he thinks of, is this was where I grew up, this is my home.
But if anybody would stop and examine the amount of money that he has donated to at least a dozen or probably more institutions in Placerville and in El Dorado County, it has been something terrific.
Tom is a rarity. He's a very enterprising artist. He understands how his artwork can help not only charitable groups but communities at large, and has expanded that well outside this local area.
A lot of people will sit back and say that Tom's artwork is wonderfully technically masterful in its approach, whether it's his studio work or his plein air work or some of the sketch work, wonderfully executed. But we really believe, firmly and strongly believe, that Tom will be remembered more for his humanitarian efforts than he will as an artist.
The big insight is simply this: what we do for others makes us happier than what we do for ourselves. Now, that sounds like the reverse of what our thinking is sometimes, because we think, well, to be happy, I better go start doing things for myself. But in fact, having that heart of a servant is the greatest form of joy there is.
Tom has become an inspiration for not only young aspiring artists, but he's become an inspiration to other young men and women who see Tom as setting a standard that's higher than what we've been accustomed to. And so they want to aspire to accomplish things in their respective fields. So he's not only an inspiration for those who love art, he's an inspiration for those who love life.
For Thomas Kinkade, as for most artists we come to care about, talent is only chapter 1. Beyond the question of facility are the issues of quality, of values, of wisdom, if you will. That is particularly true of an artist like Kinkade, noted for his generosity of spirit, who shares his experiences, his enthusiasms, his humor, his beliefs, his faith in his art.
He's going to continue to paint throughout his life. If his work is at this level now, I can't begin to imagine where it's going to be in the future.
He's a young man. He really hasn't reached his peak. When you consider that 40 to 60 is pretty well the area he's just coming into his prime. So I know it's hard to imagine, but he will keep improving.
Tom does believe, truly in his heart, that his work can touch everyone's life. He believes that it can enrich their life. Even, I mean, I think he's realistic. He doesn't expect that people's whole lives are going to change because they have a Kinkade painting on their living room wall. But I think he believes that he can be a part, even if it's a very small part, of that world.
You know, I've spent my entire life trying to present hope to people through my paintings. I try to impart a message of light, to give to others this sense that the world is not all darkness and ugliness. And a painting can do that in a very dramatic way because it goes into someone's home and it's a reminder continuously of a message. It is a little glimpse into a different world. No matter what we face in our life that might be a struggle, might be a challenge, I believe my paintings have been a tool to remind people in the midst of their struggle that there is beauty in the world, there is hope, that God loves them, that He cares for each of us, that it's not all darkness, it is light.
The idealism of the paintings helps instill that kind of hope in people's heart that things can be better and that they can have that for themselves, that these are things that are attainable in their own lives through choices and an attitude.
Having someone like Thomas Kinkade that can really chronicle our generation and communicate these important messages about people and about families, about children, about nature, and about faith, about traditions, to be able to communicate that for years and years to come is an incredible honor that Tom is going to have.
That world that he grew up in, and being a boy in that world, he still has that boy in him, and still that belief that things can be better for America. And I believe that comes out of that culture that he came out of, and he wants the American people to realize that they can live that kind of reality, no matter if they're in a big city or a small town, they can still have it in their heart.
I am really aware that for many people there is much darkness in their life. The darkness of ignorance, the darkness of poverty, the darkness of even self-destructive attitudes, feelings that are in the heart oftentimes of people that they don't care anymore. They abandon any hope for a future and they destroy their lives. You cannot believe how wonderful it is to think that in the midst of that darkness, we can light a little candle. If I spent my time cursing the darkness, it would be fruitless. We could sit around and say, poverty is a horrible thing, and curse all these social evils that we see, and rant and rave about them, but that would do little good. Instead of cursing the darkness, let's just light a candle.